Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth Podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Okay, welcome back to the Wade Borth Podcast. Today, I have the continuation of our conversation with Tarisa Shelton. She is a wealth strategist with Factum Financial. She practices the infinite banking concept. In our previous conversation, she spoke about how valuable just her life experience and what led up to her looking for a better way to treat and understand money. And I would encourage you to go back and listen to the first part of this, or the first installment of this series, because there's so much that she has to share that we want to break this into a number of different podcasts. So again, welcome, Tarisa. Welcome to listeners. Thanks for joining us again, Tarisa.
Thanks for having me. It's always a great day when I get to talk to Wade.
Thank you so much. That makes my day whenever you say that. So, in the last podcast, we talked about your why. I mean, what brought you here? And it's a fascinating story. I'm going to encourage everybody to listen to that a number of times, because if that's your story, reach out, talk to Tarisa. She is such a giving soul that she will have a conversation with you as well, because her story is unique to her, is unique to you, right? But it's not unusual for other people to have very similar stories. I mean, I kind of have a similar story to what you had. My dad passed away when I was 13, right? Your dad got sick when you were in fifth grade. So what's that, eight or nine? And so it's not a unique story, but it's unique to you. But when everybody looks back at their life, there are certain things and certain events in their life that change who they are, that define them for the future. And again, we don't have to be defined by our past, but it typically will set our mindset and set what happened to us. What happened to me back then is kind of what makes me who I am today. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to that. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about who do you talk to? Who is it that you find coming to you and wanting this information?
That's a great question. So it's really people that I think are starting to have questions about if what they're doing is the right thing for their family. Not what everyone is doing, but is what they're doing financially right for their family? And is it allowing them to achieve their goals and improve their quality of life? So it's really been people that are okay going against the grain. They're okay to challenge traditional thinking, and they're always learning. I love talking to people who are always actively learning, because those conversations are just so interesting to me. And one of the most exciting things for me in this business is seeing how people grow, not just financially. I think that's secondary, but personally, how are they leading these conversations with people that they care about? How are they actively going after their dreams and creating a life worth living? That to me is just so enticing to watch. It's kind of like watching a really great movie play out. And so it's really people that are solution oriented. They love learning and they like being empowered. So they don't want someone to do this for them. They want to do it for themselves. And there's a big difference there. And I think because I came along this journey as someone who wanted to be empowered, that's usually the type of people that I end up attracting.
Yeah, that's typically, in a perfect world, that's who we want. We want those that are like us, that, again, I'm like you. I want somebody that's willing to be taught, right? There's somebody, not so much to be taught, willing to learn. And then we can share our message, and then we can share experiences, and they're absorbing it versus not what Nelson calls having the rival syndrome. People that like, oh, I've heard this, I understand this. I've been doing it for 15 years. You've been doing it for a better part of 5 years. I can tell you that I don't completely understand it. And hopefully I never get to the point where I understand it completely, because there's so many things that happen in life along the way that are going to change our perspective on everything we do. And so what I thought about 5 years ago, what I thought about 10 years ago, and how I look at things is completely different than how I'm looking at and seeing things today, because we're now 5 years older, 5 years further down that journey, if that makes sense. So I'm like you, I love people that are willing to learn and to read and to be open to new ideas, because those that aren't open to new ideas, those that scoff without knowing what they're scoffing at, that's just usually the definition of ignorance.
Yes, I would agree with you. Yes, I would agree with you. And I can't remember who said this, but it's essentially to the effect of an open mind always has the best rate of return. When you're curious enough to learn something new, instead of just saying, oh, that can't be possible, it's always so interesting to me how it plays out.
Yeah. And I think I've had a conversation with some other people before, and I kind of see this to that same point, right? We say, or I heard it said that when have we replaced curiosity with jealousy? Because we see so many people, and there's like this jealousy going on, and versus curiosity, where I like, hey, how did you get those $20 million? What are you doing differently? And you said in the previous podcast too, is like, success leaves clues. When we start thinking that way and we start understanding that way, that's when people become empowered because they're like, I see somebody that's successful. I'm not jealous. I'm going to figure out what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then they can start building their own path.
Absolutely. And you have raised such a great point. The very successful people that I have come across are so generous with the information. And I think it is actually rarer to have somebody ask them questions instead of just having judgment as to, oh, well, they're just lucky or they had wealthy parents or whatever the case may be. It's interesting how sometimes there's justifications for how successful someone is. But I think it was Robert Kiyosaki. He said most people have it backwards. How success is created is you become that person. You do those activities that are required of a successful person, and that allows you to have the things that most successful people have. Whereas everyone wants to do it backwards.
Right.
Have, do, be. And it's like life doesn't work like that. And most successful people, they'll tell you about their failures and their bumps in the road and the days that it was really difficult for them. But no one wants to hear that part of the story, right? Because that requires accountability then on your part to be like, you know what, this path is worthwhile and I'm committed to going down that journey.
Yeah. That's so powerful, right? So it is the be, do, have conversation, right? We have to, you can maybe just run through that one more time real quick again, because I want the listeners to completely understand what you were saying there, because that is so powerful, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, not at all. Okay, so it's be. So become that person. So whoever your most idealized version of yourself is, start being that person today. So there's this exercise called future casting. So it's like, think about the highest version of yourself. What character traits does that person have? How generous are they with the people that they care about? What are they actively doing with their time? And how can you start being that person today instead of just thinking about it as a future possibility? Start being that person. And then that allows you to do the habits and activities that are required of you to be successful in life. And that is then the effect of having those things. So it's all raising your level of thinking, becoming that person, doing those things, which allows you to have the things that you want. Whereas most people have it backwards. They want to have those things first, do those activities second, and then be that person last. And I think that it's a great way to think about it as some self-accountability. Are you the person that is going to be, do, have? Or are you going to keep thinking that the backwards version of that will work out for you?
That's one of the founding tenements of the Go Giver as well, right? Give more value than you ever expect to receive. And I see that in you all the time. And so I've always appreciated that about you. It's giving of a person that's out there, and that will lead to tremendous success. I believe that in my heart. And I know that. I don't even believe it. I just know that. Because you are a person that's willing to bring value to anybody you have a conversation. So thank you for that, because you've always brought value to our conversations.
Thanks, Wade.
You're welcome. So when you talk about, again, your who's that you're working with, obviously they have to be teachable. I think that was probably the first thing that we kind of came into play. What would be some other characteristics of those who?
Let's see. Teachable, coachable. I like people to be curious. I think we already touched on this a lot, but
Yep.
I think open-minded is a huge thing. And you know what's so funny is going through life, I always am under this incorrect assumption that everyone thinks like I do. And that is totally not the case. I would say, unfortunately, just kidding. Being open-minded and just having a go-giver attitude, like you said, someone that likes to uplift the community. They're impact-driven, not money-driven. I think when you have people that are committed to a higher purpose or something that exists outside of themselves, to me, it's so inspiring to be around people like that. So I really like connecting with people that are just doing amazing things for people. That always touches my soul in such a real way, because I always say this, but I don't think our lives are for ourselves. Our lives are for the benefit of other people. And the more that we can realize that, I think the more amazing change, will happen in the world. And that's really what we need, is people that are committed to and purposeful about having a great impact on other people.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I mean, to that point, I was just thinking about this too. We have the ability to help people really clarify their goals. I think a lot of people in this world, they kind of instinctively know what's important to them, what's valuable to them. And what I love to have a conversation around is like, what's important to you? What's the most important thing to you? What does success look like? And success doesn't have to be money, right? So it's like, I want to have this for my family, or I want to be able to see my family go this direction, or I want to be, whatever that is, to help them discover their values. Because once they discover their values, then our job is really to come along and say, okay, are your actions in line with those values? And sometimes, again, it starts with empowering them to understand what their values are first. It's not our job to say, this is what you have to believe, because then it's my values, right?
Right. That's called peer pressure.
But it is about aligning our values. I think that's the who that we want. Is like, and they will identify themselves. They'll be raising their hands, and people that are listening to this, that hear this, are probably already raising their hand. Like, yeah, I want to be part of that crowd. I want to be better tomorrow than I am today, and that's where I want to be. I know that's where you want to be as well. And each and every day, that's kind of how we approach it. How can we be better, not just for ourselves, but for our family, our community, our business? How can we make everything much more abundant each and every day for all those different areas in our life?
Absolutely. And to your point, Wade, having people align their values with their actions is such a powerful way of, again, I think just asking simple questions. Is what you're doing really honoring who you are and who you want to be and who you want to serve? And if it's not, then how can we change that? And it's so much harder to define what it is you truly want versus to focus on what you don't want. It's so much harder. And it's because you actually have to have an answer for yourself. It's very easy to be like, I don't like that. I didn't like this. But if you ask someone, okay, well, what is it that you actually want? That lag time in answering the question is a sign that they spend so much more time thinking about what they don't want versus putting that same amount of energy into creating what they do want and actually taking the time to define that. And that's coming from personal experience. We both love Steve Chater, and he has this great conversation of how can you have abundance in all 5 circles: spiritual, personal, business, financial. What's the last one I'm missing? Family. Did I say that one already? Yeah. So the perfect life is abundance in all 5 circles. And he challenged us to write down that vision. And I can't tell you how long I avoided that exercise because I'm just being honest. I was like, okay, well, what is it that I actually want? And is that impacted by what I think I should be doing? Or is that actually genuine to me?
Yeah, exactly. Again, goes back to peer pressure. We've been conditioned to think along the lines of, well, this is what I'm told to do, right? I was having a conversation with my son, and I said, what is it you want to be, or who do you want to be? And he was starting to tell me what is it he wanted to do. And I said, oh, that's not the question. It's like, who do you want to be? And he goes, that's hard, Dad. I'm like, exactly. It's meant to be hard, I think, but if we can get through that exercise, then it becomes very clear. It's like if you've ever driven in fog and you're so white knuckled and everything is so intense, and as soon as the fog lifts and you can see, there's like this wave of relief that comes over you. And that's what I think what we go through in the conversations we have are to help you clarify what that purpose is that you're supposed to be doing, or what you want to be. And so I think, or not what you want to be, but who you want to be. And once you know who you want to be, then everything else kind of falls in line, right? So you can't drift to a desired location. And now we can say, okay, I want to be there. This is the person I want to be. And now we can say, I'm a fisherman. I like being on the water. So let's put the motor down and let's go there.
Right.
We can take action to get to where we want to be.
Yeah, I love that. Who do you want to be? I wish someone had asked me that question growing up. Instead, it was always, like you said, like the conversation was with your son, what do you want to do?
They're going to do whatever their peers are doing because that's the peer pressure we talk about.
Right. We joke about it, but it's a real thing.
A real thing.
We've all been impacted by that, positively or negatively at some point in our life. But I thought it's such a brilliant question. Right now, my fiance and I are taking care of our niece and nephew, and they're such great kids. So they're 9 and 10. And I was having this conversation with my niece, Lily, and she's like, I don't really know what I want to do when I grow up. And I was like, well, that's kind of secondary. The question really is like, what kind of person do you want to be? And she's like, well, I want to be nice and I want to have a lot of friends. And she starts going down all these things. And it's like, okay, great. Well, the good news is you can start doing those things now, right? You don't have to wait in the future to become that person. That's always really, in my mind, an act of evolution, of improving yourself, being growth oriented, being open-minded, always achieving to be better than you were yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's the who that we talk about, and those are the type of people you want to invite into your business as well as they're inviting you into their business. That's a good relationship. That's a super healthy relationship, right? Your values are in a line. They have an understanding what who they want to be, and you're there to assist them and to empower them. Again, you're not there to do it for them because, again, that's something they have to do. But when it comes to the infinite banking concept, do you think people understand? And part of the value system and part of that process and that conversation is getting to think a little differently. Do you think they understand what the problem is in our society?
That's a great question. So, to be honest, I don't think that they fully know how to define it. And I think that is because of a number of reasons. One, it's because they've never been taught to look at money in this way. And two, it's hard to define a problem if you don't know what it is that ails you, right? It's like if you go into the doctor, you're like, I have a headache, I have the chills, I have fever, but you go there looking for the solution because you don't know fully what's wrong. And I think that's what our job is, really, to help people notice, like, hey, you're always indefinitely, forever, starting over at zero if you don't implement infinite banking, right? And so that's what I have people realize is that, and I walk them through this exercise. If you're to close your eyes and think about all of the money that you've ever earned and all of the money that you've ever spent in your lifetime, what number of those dollars has passed through your hands? And that's usually a large number for a good majority of people. If you're making $50,000 a year, in 10 years, that's $500,000. If you're making $100,000, that's $1 million. And of that money that's passed through your hands, how much do you have access to today in your pocket? And most people,
zero mostly.
Right. And most people make a sound. They feel that because they know what that number is in their head. And then I ask them, now, what if you put a portion of those dollars, 10 to 30%, inside of an environment where you could never interrupt the compounding interest of those dollars? Would you have more today?
Obviously.
Absolutely. And so that's what I want people to realize, is that you don't have to be super rich to start infinite banking. Nelson talks about that. What's happening is the flow of money, you get paid, it goes in your bank account, you pay expenses. Whereas what infinite banking allows people to do is capture the earning potential of those dollars to keep it on their side as long as they live. And it's then transferred as a tax-free death benefit to the people that they care about most in the world. Like, I couldn't think of a better solution than that. I could not dream up this solution, right? I'm just so grateful that I found it. But that's the problem that we all have, is we're all starting over at zero. And like I said, I'm a very visual person. So that's why I like to walk people through that exercise, because it's real, right? When I first learned this, I saw all of my college tuition that I paid for go down to zero.
In cash. You saved up.
In cash. I saved up. So that's the thing that people don't realize. We're already doing all of these things. We're saving money, we're spending money, and chances are we're financing something. We are already doing those activities. The difference is someone is profiting heavily off of that action, and it's typically not at a you and me level. But with infinite banking, it can be. And I think that's the beauty of this process, is that when you can clearly define that, hey, I'm tired of my money going down to zero or going into debt and hitting zero. If you talk to a lot of people, it's like, oh, I want to pay off all my debt. We're just so trained to give the banks back our money as fast as possible. And I'm like, 0 is like the least exciting number in my personal opinion. I don't want to see 0 ever again. And I never will, because I understand what the problem is, and I am now in control of the banking function in my life and in my family's life.
Yeah, you have a beautiful visual that you use, and sorry on a podcast that most people aren't going to see this, but I would just, if you want to see that visual, drop an email to Tarisa. She might have a video made, or she can do something for you to see how that looks. Again, it's just Tarisa at factumfinancial.com. And if you want to take a look at that, just put a note in there. And it's just a great visual. I'm like you. I'm much more of a visual person, but because I do my third grade art drawings. That's how I communicate. That's how I see things. I'm a simple guy. I'm a simple farm boy from North Dakota, so that's kind of what you get. But it is a great visual, because most people don't realize. If you think about it, and I was thinking about this the other day, is like the bank. If we're going to pick on the bank, and I'm not talking about the guy that's at your bank you go to church with, or that you have a relationship with. It's just the banker in general, right? So you think about it. You come in, and like you said, you saved up. How many years did you save before you went to college?
So I was actively saving while I was in college. So I had negative fun in college because I was so committed to not having to be in debt. So I was saving while I was in college. So I worked 2 full-time jobs and went to school full-time. And so I would save while I was in college, and then I would just pay cash every semester for my tuition. And I am so upset that I learned about infinite banking after paid $30,000 plus for my college education, because I think about what could that money have earned me if I put it in the right environment first.
Right. And so you think about, again, going back to who wins in that transaction. Let's say I'm going to save up for a car or a piece of property, whatever it is I'm going to buy. I'm going to purchase something. It doesn't matter what it is. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to save $40,000 to buy X, whatever X is. And so I'm going to do this over 4 years. I'm going to put $10,000 away over 4 years. Who wins in that transaction? The bank.
The bank.
Right?
Yes.
I'm going to say, well, the heck with that. I'm going to go and I'm going to buy that car on finance. Who wins in that transaction? Still the bank. Isn't that crazy? They don't care if you save up and then deplete all your savings, go buy an asset, because they've been able to use your money. The other side of the equation, which they still win, is the person says, I'm not going to save up. I'm going to buy it and then I'm going to make payments. I'm going to give up asset, which is my time, to pay off that vehicle. And so who wins? The bank wins again. And that's the problem that most people don't understand. And again, I was 35, 36 years old when I finally kind of was starting to catch this message. So don't feel like, oh, all is lost. And again, I was in the insurance business. Why didn't somebody teach me this? This is what I'm angry about. Sometimes you're angry that you didn't learn it when you were in college. I was like angry I didn't learn it when I first got into business. But my point would be, the banks always win in those transactions. And so all we're saying to do is think like the bank, and then take that action to become the bank. Again, not so much to become a bank, but take over the banking function in your life, which is a verb and not a noun, right? We want action there. It's just the action of, I'm going to take my money, I'm going to treat it like a business, I got to store it somewhere. And where do we store it? Properly structured whole life insurance from a mutual insurance company. And then on top of that, we turn around and say, okay, now when I want to purchase something, I want to make sure that I have a plan to pay it back. And then I want to treat my bank, I love my own bank and my own family more than I would.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a great point that you just made, Wade, which is the bank always wins. They're in the business of selling money, and we give them that money in ample supply no matter what. If we save up in cash, they're turning that money and flipping it as fast as possible. If we finance, they're taking in those cash flows monthly and flipping it and turning it as fast as possible. So it just doesn't, it's like that activity is going on no matter what. And we are the depositors, are the people that make that whole thing possible. We allow them to have such a profitable business. And it's because we haven't been taught to think like the bank.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because it's so powerful that we haven't been taught to think like the bank. And I would even say some bank presidents don't completely understand that, right? They just go get a salary. They don't understand the bigger picture of how that works. So it's interesting when you talk to people that work in the banking world, the banking business, and you try to have these basic conversations. All they know is like we make money by making loans. Right? I'm gonna go back to something you said in the previous podcast. You give the apple example. I love that example. We bring everybody our apples, and people can go back and listen to the first podcast because that really describes why this is so passionate for you. But we bring them our apples. We give them our apples willingly, in bulk.
We're excited about it. They're like, yes, I have so much money in my savings account. Like, great. And the bank is looking like, yes, you have so much money in your savings account. Thank you. Right? It's like, that's one of the things that Nelson talks about in his book that really resonates with me on such a deep, powerful level. If you have unlimited supply and unlimited demand, how profitable can that business be? That is an infinite number.
I don't remember reading that. I've only read it like 60 times.
Well, maybe that's, I guess.
It's exactly what he says all the time, but it just really hit me now because that's huge. You have unlimited supply and unlimited demand.
That's the most profitable business in the world. And that's exactly what banking is. We give them the unlimited supply, and then they turn around and sell it to us because there's unlimited demand for cash. It's really that simple. And they have a monopoly over that flow of money.
That's crazy. It is. Whew, you get me going here. This is exciting. This is good stuff. I'm so excited to continue our conversation. Is there anything you want to kind of wrap up in this a little bit? Because we're going to be going into a little bit more about the tool, maybe kind of touch again more a little bit on the process of the banking principles in our next podcast in the third installment of the series. And then kind of talk about when is the best time to start implementing these ideas. So those are going to be some things we're going to be touching on in the next couple of podcasts. But I will give you the last words, Tarisa, before we depart, and then we'll come back together in the third part of the series and talk about this more because there's so much good stuff that we have to talk about.
Yes, I'm so excited to have those future conversations. I would just say and encourage everybody that's listening to, if you haven't already, read Nelson's book. Start talking and get involved. We have an awesome community of people here that are kind-hearted, like-minded, and we just want to see people succeed and start implementing this generational solution, right? I think you say this all the time, Wade, but it doesn't matter how much you know if you don't take any action. Right? So it's like once you have this education, then it is actually your duty to implement it, because it might not be, you might not suffer from that, although I would argue that you would, but it's like the generations after you absolutely will. And it's really, like I said, our lives are not for ourselves. And so if they're for other people and you believe that, then it really is your job to take action on something that is so powerful to have control of. Because at the moment, someone else does. And Wade, you ask this question all the time. It's like, when is the last time the bank has done something in your favor? And could you be that person for your family?
Yeah, exactly right. And I'm going to leave it probably with this quote that I hear you say all the time, and I know you got it from somebody else. And like all of the things that are out there in this world, there's nothing new. We just recycle everything we hear. But
right.
You always use, who loses if you don't win? Yes. And I'm going to ask that to the listener, right? Who loses if you don't win? This goes back to exactly what you're saying. If our lives aren't meant for us, it's meant for everyone else that we serve. Who loses if we don't understand this, take action, and serve our people better? Who's going to lose if you don't win? So thank you so much for your time, Tarisa. I look forward to our continued conversation. So again, thank you. And the listeners, be on the lookout for part 3 of this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Wade.
If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.